Chapter 1 Beauty. There was once a very rich merchant who had 3 daughters. Being a man of sense, he spared no cost for their education. His daughters grew to be very beautiful, but the first 2 daughters cared little about their learning. The youngest was called Beauty, a special name that made her sisters very jealous of her. But this she hardly noticed, as she was forever absorbed in one good book or another. The 2 elder sisters had a great deal of pride because they were rich. They gave themselves ridiculous airs and would not visit other merchants' daughters, nor keep company with any persons but those of the highest standing. They went out every day to parties, balls, plays, concerts, and so forth, and they laughed at their youngest sister, who spent so much of her time with the book in front of her face. One day, the merchant heard terrible news. His ship that had on board hundreds of bolts of cloth and silks he had purchased was lost at sea. Overnight, his entire fortune vanished. The family had no choice but to move to a small country house at a great distance from town. The merchant told his children, with tears in his eyes, that they must live there and work for their living. The 2 older daughters answered that they would never have to leave the town, for they had several prominent merchants who they were sure would be glad to marry them, though they no longer had a fortune. But the good ladies were mistaken, for their lovers slighted and forsook them in their poverty, as they were not liked on account of their pride. Everybody said, "They do not deserve to be pitied. We are very glad to see their pride humbled. Let them go and give themselves quality as in milking the cows and minding their chickens, like the rest of us." But, added they, were extremely concerned for Beauty. She is such a sweet tempered creature who speaks kindly to everyone, rich or poor, and has such a friendly, gracious nature. The family had no choice but to move to a small country house at a great distance from town. When the family moved to their country house, the merchant applied himself to farming. Beauty rose at 4 in the morning before the others awoke and made haste to light the fire, clean the house, and prepare breakfast for the family. In the beginning, she found the work very difficult, for she was not used to this sort of hard labor. But in less than 2 months, she grew stronger and healthier than ever. After she had done her chores, Beauty read a book, played the harpsichord, or sang while she spun yarn. Her 2 sisters, on the other hand, did not know how to spend their time. They got up at 10 and did nothing but saunter about the whole day, lamenting the loss of their fine clothes and acquaintances. "Look at our youngest sister," they snickered to each other. "See how well suited she is to a life of menial labor." Chapter 2 The Later. The family had lived about a year in the country house when the merchant received stunning news in a letter The ship that the merchant was sure had been lost at sea had, in fact, safely arrived at port. The family rejoiced in this sudden turn of fortune. When the two older daughters saw their father ready to set out to claim his lost ship, one begged him to bring back for her a necklace of gems. The other demanded a thick golden chain, and Beauty asked only for a rose. The good man set off on his journey. When he came to where the ship was docked, oh, such problems there were over who properly owned the ship and the merchandise on board. After a great deal of trouble and pains, to no purpose, he came back as poor as before, especially after he bought the fine new necklace and the gold chain he had promised to his two older daughters. Thinking he might come upon a rose bush to satisfy the wish of his youngest daughter, he led his horse deep into the woods. As the sun set and the wind began to howl, the poor man realized that he was hopelessly lost. Was a sudden rainstorm drenched him, and then a snowstorm struck. He knew he might well starve to death from the cold or hunger, or be devoured by the wolves, whom he heard howling all around him. Then, looking far off into the distance, he saw a small light blinking. Going on a little farther, he noticed it came from a palace lit with candles from top to bottom. The merchant hastened to the palace and was greatly surprised at not meeting anyone in the outer courts. Seeing a large stable open, he led his horse inside. Finding both hay and oats, the poor beast, who was almost famished, fell to eating very heartily. The merchant tied him safely to a post and walked towards the house, where he still saw no one. Entering a large hall, he found a good fire and a table set out with plenty of steaming food. Someone must live here in the house, he thought. But who and where were they? He drew near the fire to dry his soaked clothes. I hope, he thought, the master of this house or his servants will excuse the liberty I take. I'm sure it will not be long before some of them appear. Someone must live in the house, he thought, but who? And where were they? He waited a considerable time until the clock struck 11, and still nobody came. At last, the merchant was so hungry that he could not stand it no longer. Trembling, he took a leg of chicken and ate it in 2 mouthfuls. After this, he drank a few glasses of wine. Growing more courageous, he went out of the hall and crossed through several grand rooms with magnificent furniture until he came to a bedroom. In the middle of the room was a four-poster bed covered by a red velvet canopy draped with fringes. As he was very tired and it was past midnight, he concluded it was best to shut the door and go to sleep.